before we get in this episode, can you do us a favor? Will you go ahead and subscribe to the channel?
Will you ring that notification bell?
And if you would, give this video a like. Well, enough of that mumbo jumbo. Let's get to the episode.
Let's talk developmentally speaking, glow up, and connecting through wrestling.
Hey everybody, I'm Morty.
And I'm Brian.
And on today's episode of Connecting Through Wrestling, we have custom-made Eric Draven, the Broken Star. So this is a first time for the developmentally speaking family of podcasts. We have someone in studio with us. I want to thank you for showing up, coming here, taking time out of your day to actually be here with us.
I appreciate the invite.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure you've seen the show before and you know what the first question is, so I'm going to go ahead and ask it. What made you want to get into professional wrestling?
Well, I was probably 5 years old, and I got up every Saturday morning and would watch cartoons, and I was flipping through the channels, and Bill Dundee was wrestling Jerry the King Lawler, and he had Lawler in the corner, he was pummeling him, and then Lawler pulled the strap down and made the big comeback, and from that point on, I was a big.
Now, Bill Dundee, thanks to you, I've been on shows with Bill Dundee, and I can tell you that man has a punch. Because I remember thinking, oh, this old guy can't hit that hard. No, he straight up clocked me right off the ring apron. I don't know if you remember that or not, but yeah, that was a long time ago. But so how did your wrestling training begin?
Okay, so I started very young. I was actually 13 years old when I started trying to train to wrestle. And my stepfather knew a guy that lived in Beebe, Indiana, that had a wrestling ring in his backyard. And this is before the days of backyard wrestling really taking off and whatnot. This guy had been a outlaw wrestler for a long time and was kind of well known in our area. And me and a buddy went down there and asked him if we can get in the ring and, try to learn how to wrestle. And we were trying to teach ourselves. And, I was very athletic at the time. I did a moonsault, and at that point in time, we didn't see too many people doing moonsaults. And he saw me do the moonsault, and he come outside and he said, "Let me see you do that backflip off the top rope again." I did it again, and the next week we were booked on his wrestling show. And he said he was going to train us, and there was literally no training other than setting up the ring and tearing down the ring. We would ride to the shows on the back of his truck, holding the ring in the truck.
Oh, man.
And then when we would get there, we would set up the ring, and then he had these signs that you put over your head. There's a sign in the front and the back, and we'd have to walk down Main Street of whatever town we were in with tickets and yelling, "Wrestling tickets! We got your wrestling tickets!" And that was the only advertising he done. He didn't go to towns and hang up flyers or anything like that. He just sent
sandwich boards.
Yeah, he just sent his dream guys around town, sandwich boards, selling signs, selling tickets day on the show. And I only wrestled for a few shows for him. But the first one, there was 7 matches on the show, and I was in 6. And my buddy that was training with me was in all 7 matches.
Wait, so you were in 6 of 7 matches on the show? What, was there any hoods involved? Or
no, surprisingly, I was in my regular clothes. I didn't have wrestling gear at the time, so I was in street clothes in every match. And Ben, the guy that was with me, he wore a mask. He would go back and put a mask on, but he didn't have time to change his clothes, so he would be in the same clothes wearing a mask under a different name. In the main event on that night, it was me and Ben against Roger and Matt Garvey. They were supposed to be the ones that were training us. And Matt goes to put me in a figure 4. He wraps his leg around me, and he leans over. And again, this is the guy who was supposed to be training me. He leans over and asks me, he says, "Am I doing this right?" But the first match on that night was me against Madman Pondo, and my buddy Ben. He was the referee of that match, and then he wrestled that match. But after the show, Pondo pulled me aside and told me that I did really good out there for a guy with as little training as I had. And then he told me find a different practice. And so I took the advice and started for a different practice. I showed up at a USWA show. They were in Madison, which Phoenix, that's where I live. And they were National Guard Armory, and I asked Eddie Marlin, who was the on-TV promoter for USWA, how I could get trained. And he asked me how old I was, and I told him, and he told me to go talk to Danny Davis. And Danny was working for USWA at the time. He was at the gimmick table. I went over and asked him, and he said, "Absolutely not. We can't train you until you're 18 years old." and Jeff Jarrett was at the next table over. He confirmed with Jarrett. He agreed. They weren't going to train. So they were set up for a tour of fair shows throughout Kentucky, and me and my buddies showed up to every one of those fair shows. And luckily enough for us, that the ring crew guys that were supposed to set the ring up, the ring was there, but the guys that were supposed to set it up got a DUI on the way there. So my buddy and I set the ring up for them 4 nights in a row. And after that, Ricky Morton told them, they're here anyway, let's teach them something. And that's how my training started.
Wow. See, I knew that you and Ricky had known each other for a long, long time. So where did you go from there? How did training begin? I mean, you being younger than 18, I'm sure they didn't like.
Well, they actually did allow me into the wrestling school. Obviously, I wasn't able to do anything in Kentucky due to licensing.
Mhm.
But I was at the wrestling school and I was there 4 days a week. My mom would take me down. She would stay with me in the hotel. We'd stay 4 days and we'd come back to Indiana. So 4 days in Tennessee, 3 days in Indiana until my training was done. And then I went with, actually, Jeff Jarrett went to WWE and G.L.O.W. And at that point, my training went to OVW. So I was 8.5 months into my training and then I went to OVW. They were in Jeffersonville, Indiana at the time. Finished up my training there.
The old building, the old Davis
11,
Arena.
1121 Mechanic Street. And as Rip Rogers says, Jeff Jarrett taught me how to wrestle, and Rip taught me how to cuss.
So I could imagine training back then. It's so much different than it is now. And you know, you got with the people you got in connections with was very beneficial because if you look at wrestling today, I mean, me, my neighbor Morty, we're all training people. It's oversaturated. It feels like it doesn't have And with Supreme doing a school, you know, it helps a lot. I feel because a lot of people get taken advantage of, or hurt, or injured, or
There are good things that have changed since my training and bad things. A good thing is I probably weighed 160 to 170 pounds when I started training. And from then until I was about 30 years old, I'd never made it to 200 pounds. And I was never taken seriously by the bigger guys until they got me in the ring and they beat on me and realized that I just wasn't going to quit.
mm-hmm.
And nowadays, that kind of behavior is not really the norm in wrestling. And if it is, those people get looked at bad. And I'll be the first to admit it. I used to be guilty of somebody coming in and I thinking they're not going to make it, and then maybe I hit them a little harder than usual or something like that. And that's changed in me too. I've evolved with the business in that aspect. But there's a good side to that too. Is there's a lot of people that are in wrestling that kind of behavior would have kept from getting into wrestling, and maybe we wouldn't have some of these outlaw mud show wrestling promotions out
Mm-hmm.
there. Spider Murphy, those kind of shows.
Not to name any names, really.
Let her fly.
So,
Morty's personal favorite is Ian Rotten.
Well, actually, we were kind of just having a conversation about Ian. I I don't get along with Ian at all. We don't see eye to eye on what wrestling is. I don't really have any bad stories about Ian, other than that there was a fan that used to go to Ian's show that quit going to Ian's show because the way Ian yelled at the crowd at shows when the crowd wasn't very big, and the guys started coming to my show. And it's been my understanding that Ian took that personally against me. The only thing I did was put on a good show and treat my fans with respect.
right. Well, there's one other story that I know where Ian disrespected Supreme and you.
Yes, yeah, I kind of forgot about that. And
Way to go,
it's
Morty.
kind of funny. There was a snowstorm, and this is predating what you knew about it probably. There was a snowstorm, and Ian had a show scheduled. I think it was his comeback to Indiana show, and he called me. Actually, he had his son call me and wanted to rent my ring because his ring was on the way from Illinois, and the truck slid off the ring. And this was on a Friday. As we all know, I have an every Saturday show and have had an every Saturday show for 25 years in Madison. And so I was a little nervous about running my ring on Friday to a guy who was less than stellar reputation.
Mm-hmm.
And he had his son call me and ask me about running the ring, and I said no. And then Ian called me to kind of plead with me a little bit, and again I said no. And then Todd Morton called me and talked to me and said it was his comeback to wrestling, and Todd being a good friend of mine. Then I reached back out to Ian and cut him a deal, and it wasn't much of a deal. Uh, I kind of hosed him on the deal, really. I charged twice what I would normally charge somebody, but I didn't want to rent it to him, and I let him know. And in addition to that, I did not deliver the ring. He had to come up and get it himself. He rented the U-Haul, drove to Madison, tore the ring down, took it, did his show, brought the ring back, and set the ring back up. And he paid me twice what I would normally rent it for. Plus, he was going to do me a favor and work a show for me for free. I didn't know where I would ever use Ian Rotten on a show, but I just said thank you and went on about my day. Well, we had a show lined up at a college, and I thought, well, this is a perfect opportunity to use Ian Rotten because college kids drinking, hardcore guy, they'll get into it. So I bring Ian up for that, and he sits in the dressing room, which this was our first show to college, and they set us up in a tent, so it wasn't much of a dressing room.
Like pop-up gazebos.
Yeah, it was a pop-up gazebo or two or three put together. And he was bad-mouthing pretty much everyone as they went to the ring, but not while they were in the dressing room, including at the time the current NWA World Champion Rob Conley. Then he went out for his match, and keep in mind he never spoke to his opponents pre-match. All he said was, "We're going to do a traditional old school match." And I warned him the chairs didn't belong to us, so don't damage any of the chairs. First thing he does is take his opponent and throw him into the chairs. And then they start picking up chairs and hitting each other, and it got out of control. But that's.
How long ago was that? I feel like I was there.
I think it was 2012 or 2013. It was early days for my relationships with Morty and Johnny Justice.
Yeah, because Johnny Justice ended up getting concussion from that match.
I think it was within the first 4 or 5 matches that the Blue Beetle had, because he really didn't know how to handle himself like this. It would be easy enough to find out, and it was Rob Conway's first NWA World Title reign. So, for anybody who wants to look that up,
was that when Kevin Sullivan's nephew was wrestling down there?
This was before Dash was wrestling.
So you talked about Blue Beetle. I remember because I was managing Beetle and Johnny. My favorite part of that whole match was, Johnny was already laid out. He wasn't seeing straight, and Beetle's in the ring with Ian Rotten's kid, and Ian Rotten's kid has a chair, and Beetle doesn't care. He just looks across the ring and goes, "What do you plan on doing with that?" He says, "I'm going to hit you with it." He goes, "Not in the head, you are." and so it ended up being the time to go home, and they were going to do a rocket launcher. Ian was going to have his son jump off his shoulders. Well, he gets up there, and the kid's like, "I don't know if I can do this." And Beetle's just laying there, and he goes, "Effing do it, pussy." And he did it, but it was one of those like, whoa, okay.
Unfortunately, I didn't, or maybe fortunately, I don't know, I didn't get to see any of that match. I didn't know anything went bad in that match until the show was over and we were already tearing the ring down.
Right.
The reason for that is that show, it rained like crazy. It was pouring, and we were going to cancel it. We were just going to see if they would reschedule. All the wrestlers were there, and Rob Conway looks at me and says, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, it's up to you." And he leans over and he looks outside and he says, and the reason why it was up to him is, again, he was the current NWA World Champion. He was months out of WWE. Just a few months prior, he was on TV for WWE, and now he's the NWA World Champion. And he's asking me, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, it's up to you. What do you want to do?" He looks out, and the fans are still, they're all standing. They haven't taken a seat. Maybe it's because their seats are wet. I don't know. But they're standing in the rain, just watching an empty ring, waiting for this first match. He said, "Well, they're not leaving." And I said, "Well, we could send some people out there and start the show, but what are you going to do?" He said, "I would wrestle you in a torrential downpour." And now I've been wrestling for almost 31 years, and that is still, to me, the biggest compliment I've ever had. That Rob Conway would trust me enough And you've been in a ring when it's wet. That thing is so slick. And he knew it. It's a vinyl ring cover. It is so slick.
It's slicker than
He would wrestle me in a torrential downpour. And believe it or not, we had a fantastic match. Well, you were at ringside.
Yeah.
But for anybody watching this, we had a great match. And it kicked off, I think, 17 matches between
something like that for sure. Yeah.
Speaking of which, next month we will have our 18th and probably final match.
Yeah. That's crazy.
I want Conway on the show.
Yeah, we want Rob. We want to get Rob on here so bad. That's one of the people that he was episode 1 of Not Only Speaking. I was very adamant about doing the first episode about him. And
I have messaged him about it before and messaged him for other podcast friends. And I get the impression he doesn't like doing podcasts. And for the record, this is the first podcast I've been on. This is the first one I've agreed to do. I've had multiple people message me, and this is the first one I've come on.
Well, we appreciate that for sure. Absolutely. So you have the show with Rob coming up. What else do you have lined up?
We have February 4th in Hanover, Indiana, Southwestern Elementary School. It's a fundraiser for suicide prevention, and we have former WWE and current Impact star Rhino on that one. It will be this Sunday. We'll be here in Seymour. And, one Sunday per month will be in Seymour. It's the second Sunday of the month every month, except for February. It will be the third Sunday because there's some football game or something going on.
Some weird football game going on?
Some football game going on in the second one. We don't want to.
Right. Yeah, don't want to compete with some football game, right? So I've noticed online, there's another podcast that's friends, kind of frenemies, if you will, with this podcast. It's called Back Talk, and I've let you know what one of the people on there's been saying about you, just because I'd like to see what your thoughts are. You
were starting the talk.
That's not something I would do. But you've kind of just left me in the dark. You just got, okay, I'll look at it. You never really told me your thoughts.
Well, like I said earlier, before we aired, a lot of times people they say some stuff about me, and I kind of just let it go. I've been wrestling for almost 31 years. I hear some negative stuff, but usually it's coming from jealousy from a guy who's a wrestler, a guy who maybe he was wrestling for Supreme, and maybe I pushed someone instead of him, and he went off somewhere, or maybe I pushed someone instead of his friend, and he's never wrestled for me. That's how most of people's negativity towards me goes. This guy, I don't know, I've never even met him, or maybe I have. Maybe that's his problem. Maybe he's come to the show and asked me for an autograph. But so I watched the first time that he talked about me, or what I'm assuming is the first time. And he refers to me as Shawn Michaels Jr. I like to say it's a compliment. Shawn Michaels is a great performer.
Right.
I've never been a fan of Shawn Michaels.
Right.
And I'm from Texas. I wear a cowboy hat. I got long hair. And my voice is kind of raspy, right? This is my real voice. This is my cowboy hat, and I wear it everywhere I go. I've worn cowboy hat everywhere I've been since I was old enough to choose my own style. And I've had long hair since before I watched wrestling. It's just who I am. If who I am is like Shawn Michaels, then I'm like Shawn Michaels. Now, for him to say that I'm ripping Shawn Michaels off, I'll go ahead and give you some material. I do rip some people off because let's take, for instance, Hulk Hogan and Scott Steiner. They were rip-offs of superstar Billy Graham, but they wouldn't call it a rip-off. They would call it paying homage, or maybe taking something from. Each generation takes something from the last generation, something they watched.
Oh, well, yeah, I can agree with that.
If somebody wanted to say that maybe I rip off Scott Levy, right? Maybe I do. Maybe I do some moves and some style that he did. I don't really do that as much now as I used to, but if you watch some of my older stuff, you would see that. Some people would say there's some Randy Savage in there. It's more subtle with Randy Savage, but it's more in the way I act or the way I conduct myself versus my moves. Eddie Gilbert, hot stuff Eddie Gilbert. That's, to be honest, that's where most of who Aaron Draven, the wrestling character, comes from. And then there's one other one that I would gladly accept saying that I rip off or that I pay homage to or that I school from, or however you want to word it. And that's Jeff Jarrett. That's where I got started. That's who broke me into the business. And yeah, I pull a lot from Jeff. But every long-haired cowboy hat wearing guy from Texas is not Shawn Michaels. Otherwise, The Undertaker, Barry Windham, those guys would be copying Shawn Michaels. And really, that would mean Shawn Michaels was copying Barry Windham because Barry Windham was first. But we'll just let that one go. We'll just let that one go and just call that a guy that runs a podcast that knows nothing about what I do.
Right. And you know, you've heard it before. There's another thing that people always say that you ripped off would be Eric Draven, that name.
Yeah, and so the name Eric Draven was the character in The Crow, and I believe, and anybody can Google this and find out that I'm right. The Crow came out in 1994.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrestled my first match June 18th, 1992. And on that show, I used my real name. On my next show, which was a week later, so I guess it would be June 25th, 1992, my name was Eric Draven. So I was Eric Draven before I knew anything of The Crow. And I know somebody will throw this out there. Apparently, there was a comic book that predates that. I'm not a comic book guy. I know nothing of the comic book. I've heard since then that there was. And I will gladly admit to any things that I've done in wrestling that rips anybody off. I used to paint my face, ironically, kind of like The Crow. But I didn't take that from The Crow. I was looking at the Hit Parader magazine. I took it from the band Kiss. I mean, yeah, I didn't come up with it on my own, but if we're going to say that I'm copying somebody, let's get where it comes from first. But I want to talk about Andy Shades' second time that he talked about it. So he saw me in Seymour last month, and I was wrestling Cash Jackson in the main event. And I got this move that I do where I grab a guy, I throw him straight up in the air, and on the way down, I kick him. My foot goes right up between their legs. It's great. And so Andy Shade says that I cannot win a match without kicking a guy in the nuts. Well, I got news for you, pal. I've been wrestling 30 years and I've won a lot of matches, and some of them with the fans behind me, some of them with them on the other side. I'm 45 years old. Cash is half my age. Yeah, I'm going to kick him in the nuts. I need the advantage. But you know what? I could beat Cash without doing it. I'm just trying to slim it down a little bit in time.
Absolutely. But did you hear the part where, I don't know if you watched it long enough to see, Andy Shade says he's going to come kick you in the nuts.
I did hear that. And so let's go a week forward from that podcast to last Friday. I wrestled Charlie Key in Madison, Indiana. And if anybody's going to look up the match, I'm going to go ahead and give you just a little spoiler alert. I came into the match, the Mid-American Champion. I left the match, still the Mid-American Champion. And I believe we wrestled for roughly 25 minutes. And I don't think anybody got hit in the nuts. And the ironic thing about that is Andy Shades was at ringside. He could have jumped right up and kicked me in the nuts and done what he said he was going to do. He didn't do it. So I'm just going to throw this out there. If he shows up in Seymour, I'm going to see if he's got what it takes. I'm going to call him out right to his face, not over a podcast, not like what he does, not in the safety of a studio. I'm going to get right up in his face.
Well, let's be honest. He doesn't have a studio. He's in the house. He isn't like this.
I swear to God, if he calls it a pod shed one more time.
I know, right? It's ridiculous. Is this a shed? Are you in the shed right now?
I'll tell you, this is the top-notch studio.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But what I'm saying is, if he shows up, and I know it's just right down the road for him, it's right here in Seymour, Indiana. If he shows up this Sunday, I will get in his face. I'll give him that opportunity to kick me in the nuts.
Oh, you hear it here. That's crazy. You're going to give a fan an opportunity to kick you in the nuts.
I'm telling you, he don't have the nuts.
All right. Well, I want to say thank you for coming on, for sure. Is there anything else that you'd like to promote right now?
Every Saturday, Madison, Indiana, 2520 Lanier Drive, Supreme Wrestling. It's old school wrestling with a little bit of a new age twist. I'm evolving, Brian. I know that we've had a lot of discussions about the direction of the business. I'm not evolving as much as you have. The second Sunday of every month, right here in Timor, Racing Mason. Early bell time, doors open at 2, bell time at 3. That's all we got.
And of course, we love good trainers on this channel. This is the man that trained me. This is, without this man, Mortimer Blankenship wouldn't exist. As a matter of fact, the first show I ever did, the person that was running that show told me that I would never be in a wrestling show in Madison, Indiana again. Draven came along and said, "No, that's wrong." So I want to thank you for everything you've done for me, for sure, because I grew up watching wrestling, never thought I'd actually be in it.
And as far as that goes, we do run training, and again, that's 2520 Linear Drive in Madison, Indiana. Anyone watching this can get a hold of Mortimer Blankenship or Brian or myself to find out details about how they can get started. Absolutely. Over the last 25 years, I have trained people who have wrestled all over, not just the state of Indiana, but Tennessee, Kentucky, pretty much the world. Big names locally, you can call them big names, but I mean guys who every wrestling show anybody goes to in Indiana, they see somebody I train.
Yeah, it's true. It's absolutely true. So once again, thank you for coming on. This Sunday, 3 p.m. in Seymour, Indiana, Racing Masons. Make sure you come check out Eric Draven as him and Chet Wrigley take on Johnny Justice and Cash. That's a Texas Tornado style
It's
match?
Texas Tornado, no disqualification, and if Andy Shades is at ringside, come watch him not kick me in the nuts.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That's it from live here in the studio, guys. Have a good one.
Hey everybody, it's Morty.
It's Brian.
And thank you for watching today's episode of Developmentally Speaking.
If you could, please click that subscribe button.
And don't forget to punch that bell icon so you can get notified whenever we go live or drop a new video every Monday. Well, thanks for watching, guys, and we'll see you on the next
Developmentally Speaking.